was a dog and pony show that was really designed to try to improve public sentiment around the Climate Commitment Act. So this event, let me just paint a picture of it for you. It was held at Miller Community Center in Seattle, and it was billed to the public as a policy and budget preview, okay? Policy and budget preview. And again, I've seen a lot of those. Sometimes it's just politicians sitting behind a desk holding a press conference for the media. That was not this. Nicole, can you play this video? The Miller Community Center in Seattle. Governor Jay Inslee, with a bunch of children behind him, bunch of his political allies, Democrats in Olympia behind him, people with these signs about protecting the climate and the environment. Governor Inslee is going around before he comes on screen. He's shaking hands with all the children. And I'll tell you, when I first started watching this came across as a campaign rally. This came across as a campaign event. There is no doubt in my mind this was a carefully orchestrated event to try to shift public opinion, which has been going against the governor on the Climate Commitment Act and the repercussions of it. So I'm going to play for you. Look, if you're watching this first 20 minutes of the show today, this is going to be a blow-by-blow analysis, a detailed analysis of what Democrats are saying about their climate goals and the truth behind those climate goals, what they're saying about the impacts of their climate programs and the truth about the impacts of their climate programs. So if you care about that, stick with us. So at this press conference, aka campaign rally, was State Senator Joe Wynn, who has been a big backer of the Climate Commitment Act. And he said, and one of the efforts that he's endeavoring this legislative session is to try to hold big oil accountable for what? Price gouging?
This is a fight for our future. This is a fight for our kids' future. And just like we hold ourselves accountable and just like we hold our kids accountable, big oil should be held accountable for their actions as well.
Just like we hold ourselves accountable, big oil should be held accountable. What level of accountability has there been for the lies and concealment and cover-ups around the Climate Commitment Act? When have Democrats in Olympia held themselves accountable for that? When has Governor Jay Inslee held himself accountable for the fact that his climate goals that he's put forth, that he's paraded around the world talking about, have never been met? Where's the accountability for the fact that carbon emissions are actually up? Where's the accountability for the fact that in the 11 years Governor Inslee has been governor, recycling is actually down? So State Senator Joe Wynn says, just as we hold ourselves accountable, big oil needs to be held accountable. For what? For passing on costs that you put on them as the government? They're for-profit businesses. If you make it more expensive for them to do business, they're going to pass those costs along to consumers. If you try to hold every private enterprise responsible for passing costs along to consumers, that's going to get real confusing real fast and really bad for our economy really fast. Also present was Representative Beth Dolio, who used it as an opportunity to praise Governor Jay Inslee for the good work he's done on the environment.
Thanks to Governor Inslee's leadership over the past few years, Washington State has created some of the most ambitious climate policy in the world. It is really amazing.
Sure, Governor Jay Inslee has talked about some of the most ambitious climate policy in the world, but all of it has fallen short of the goals that he imposed on himself in the state of Washington. This isn't coming from me. The King 5 investigators had just done a report on that the governor's key climate goals have not only not been met, but a government website that was the governor's brainchild when he first took office to hold himself accountable to those goals. That website started scrubbing information about the goals. So you and I couldn't even go look and easily access what the goals are and see the fact that he's not meeting them. There's nothing praiseworthy about that. There's nothing praiseworthy about a governor who has for the last 20 years made climate his thing, gone around the world putting himself out there as the climate governor, as the climate presidential candidate, making everyone believe that he's improving the environment when the goals he set for himself are far from being met, if not impossible to meet. Yeah, sure, I could throw out some goal like, hey, we're going to have no gas-powered vehicles by 2025 in the whole world ever. People would they be like, wow, Brandi, wow, she really cares about the environment. You can't just throw out goals that you're not going to be able to meet and that you're not meeting despite getting billions and billions of dollars in revenue. You can't just throw it out and expect people to praise you. Yet there's this whole segment of people who claims to care about the environment that praises him for completely empty promises and goals. It makes no sense to me. And that's why, again, to have Rep. Beth Dolio out there praising Governor Jay Inslee for goals that he's not even meeting reads as a campaign event to change public opinion in the governor's favor. Beth Dolio went on to say that, this is going to be expensive. Doing this sort of difficult work and these difficult goals, it costs money.
It's no longer free to pollute in Washington state.
It's no longer free to pollute in Washington state. Yeah, we're aware of that. We're aware of that because your efforts to reduce pollution are hurting working class people in Washington state. Your efforts that you say are about big bad oil and making them pay for their pollution, they are passing that along to the people who are least able to pay. Again, the idea that a private company of any kind would absorb all of the costs that the government is thrusting upon them is a fantasy. It is a fantasy. That's not the way our economy works. So as you stand up there and brag about it's no longer free to pollute in Washington state, you are celebrating your whims and desires that are coming on the backs of working class Washingtonians. And it's kind of embarrassing, I'll be honest. It's a little cringy to see you do that. Now, Governor Jay Inslee, who also spoke at this event, and speak did he was talking about all the money they're bringing in from the Climate Commitment Act, all the money that they're getting, which remember is coming from you. Big oil, they're getting that money. They might be paying it at these carbon auctions, but they're getting it back from working class people. They're getting it back from you and I. And Governor Jay Inslee is aware of that, but he spins it as a positive, and really it's an acknowledgement that this is socialism.
This money is recycled where it should be recycled, which are hardworking Washingtonians.
So you take money from hardworking Washingtonians and, in the governor's words, recycle it to other hardworking Washingtonians? So you take from the poor and the middle class and give to the poor and the middle class. Or you could just let them keep their own money. You could just stop taxing them to death. The governor also goes on to say, and this is just an example of government at its finest, they create a problem and then they come to the rescue. They create a cost and then they come to the rescue and pretend that they, the government, are so generous in helping you with that cost. Remember one of the impacts of the Climate Commitment Act? It's increasing energy rates. Puget Sound Energy has said as much, a 3% increase for its customers. So the cost to heat your home is higher under the Climate Commitment Act. So the government, generous as it is, Governor Jay Inslee, generous as it is, they're going to help you with that problem.
We're putting several millions of dollars to help people get a check so that they can help you pay your utility bills. It's a right thing to do for hardworking Washingtonians.
This is insane. Think about it. Think independently about this. Take your political labels off, your ideology, put it aside. Nicole, can you play that soundbite one more time for me?
We're putting several millions of dollars to help people get a check so that they can help you pay your utility bills. It's a right thing to do for hardworking Washingtonians.
So the governor creates a program that makes your utility bills more expensive. And then the governor pats himself on the back when he says he's going to send working class Washingtonians a check to help with their energy bills. In what world is that praiseworthy? In what world does that make any sense? We're going to create a problem, we're going to place a burden on you, and then we, the government, are going to rescue you from that burden. We're going to remove that burden from your shoulders. That's the way a government acts when it wants people to be truly dependent on them. That's the way a government acts when it wants people to believe that the government is the key to your success and your well-being and your happiness, even if it's the government that's contributing to your burdens in this life. It's actually pretty sick, if you ask me. So you remember Governor Jay Inslee and the infamous pennies quote, right? So when the Climate Commitment Act was passed, Governor Jay Inslee was asked, hey, it seems like when you start this cap and trade program where you auction off these carbon credits, that, economics 101, they're going to pass that along to the consumer and we're going to see higher gas prices. I mean, that's kind of what this is designed to do, right? And when he was presented with that question about, hey, isn't this going to raise gas prices? Here's what the governor said.
This is going to have minimal impact, if any. Pennies. We're talking about pennies, potentially.
Pennies. And of course, that came back to haunt the governor because as soon as the auctions began, gas prices went up about 50 cents. And then it became pretty clear, as most common sense people knew, that, the Climate Commitment Act and the carbon allowances are raising prices at the pump. It's sort of undeniable. So at this press conference today, and the media knew this press conference was going to happen. Like, they had advanced warning about it. And so Nicole and I were sitting here watching it this morning like, he better take questions. He better take questions at this thing. And the media better ask him about some of the negative headlines around the Climate Commitment Act. John Stang, who's an independent reporter, was the first up. And he did try to pin Governor Jay Inslee down on the infamous pennies comment. And here's the governor.
What happened between pennies going up to 26 to 50 cents per gallon?
Well, first off, it isn't that. I strenuously object to that. Look, we have been whipsawed too long by the oil and gas industry, and we need a transparency bill to really find out what's going on. And I'll tell you what's going on. Instead of putting this money into investment in renewable energy, they're putting it into the $200 billion of record profits.
I'm trying to pin you down. You said pennies on a gallon in 2021. Some other Democrats said the same thing. How'd you come to pennies per gallon then?
First off, I did not. There was an assessment done by agencies that looked at what had happened in the California cap and trade system. You got to understand this is fairly unique. We're only the second or third one in the North American continent. They did the best job they could to try to predict what would happen.
They did the best job they could to try to predict what would happen. So Governor Jay Inslee, when asked about the fact that he wrongly predicted that this would have negligible impact on gas prices, that it would amount to pennies, if that, per gallon. When asked about that, his excuse is to blame the people with the state who tried to predict what the impact would be. And he says they did the best job they could. That's interesting because his answer there comes on the heels of a lawsuit from a former WSDOT employee whose job it was to predict what the impact on gas prices would be. And you'll remember what he predicted. He predicted that it would raise gas prices per gallon about 45 to 50 cents. And what happened to him for making the best prediction he could as a 30-year economist? He claims that he was told by his bosses with the Washington State Department of Transportation to shut up about it, to leave it out of his reports. His life was made so miserable that he decided to resign. They moved his job to a different agency entirely, one that was more closely affiliated and had more close oversight from the governor. So here you have Governor Jay Inslee, when asked about his pennies prediction, which was just demonstrably wrong, he blames it on incorrect forecasts from people who work for the state of Washington who do that kind of stuff, when we know that there was a state economist now suing the state who says he made what turned out to be a dead accurate forecast And he was told by his bosses to leave it alone. And you want me to believe the governor didn't know about that? So he can now conveniently blame his pennies guess on the bad work and bad predictions of state economists, when there was a state economist who has the proof that his forecast was that it would raise gas prices as much as 50 cents a gallon. And he was told, don't put that in your reporting. Nicole, can you play that clip again? Because in the context of what I just told you, what we know to be true, listen to that answer from the governor again.
What happened between pennies going up to 26 to 50 cents per gallon?
Well, first off, it isn't that. I strenuously object to that. Look, we have been whipsawed too long by the oil and gas industry, and we need a transparency bill to really find out what's going on. And I'll tell you what's going on. Instead of putting this money into investment in renewable energy, they're putting it into the $200 billion of record profits.
I'm trying to pin you down. You said pennies on a gallon in 2021. Some other Democrats said the same thing. How'd you come to pennies per gallon then?
First off, I did not. There was an assessment done by agencies that looked at what had happened in the California cap and trade system. You got to understand this is fairly unique. We're only the second or third one in the North American continent. They did the best job they could to try to predict what would happen.
So not only does the governor, again, blame it on economists, when we know there was a state economist who made an accurate prediction, the state just chose not to listen to that prediction and try to stifle that prediction. But the governor has the audacity to say, we need transparency here in prices. You know, they're pushing for this transparency in pricing bill to hold big gas and oil companies, private enterprise, accountable. We want to know how they're spending there. We want to know the details. They are covering things up. When there have been multiple stories in the past month about Governor Jay Inslee, his administration, his political allies blatantly covering things up related to the climate, related to their climate agenda. Again, I feel the need to rehash them one by one. The King 5 investigators story that looked at the fact that Governor Jay Inslee has missed all his climate goals, and that the state website created to track those goals got rid of information about the goals. That's a cover-up. The Puget Sound Energy story, where Puget Sound Energy went to the State Utilities and Transportation Commission and said, hey, we have to raise energy rates for our customers because of the Climate Commitment Act, and we want to put it as a line item on the bill so we can be transparent. And what did the State Utilities and Transportation Commission decide, acting on the advice from the Attorney General's office? Oh, that you shouldn't put it as a line item. We should study that idea more. That'll just be too confusing for people. Again, that's a cover-up. And then you bring it full circle to the whistleblower with the State Department of Transportation who says he was asked not to relay to the powers that be a very accurate prediction of the impact that all of this would have on gas prices. And after all of that, which isn't coming from Inslee's political foes, we're talking about two King 5 investigator story, the most left-leaning TV station in the state. And then we're talking about a public hearing that played out before our very eyes about Puget Sound Energy. So after all of that, 3 concrete examples at least about a lack of transparency, about lies, and about a cover-up. And what does Governor Jay Inslee say we need to do to get to the bottom of all of this? We need to make big gas and oil be accountable and be transparent. For the love, you cannot make this stuff up. And this is why on this show, it's not about telling you what to think. It's about giving you the facts, giving you the information, giving you the context you need to think independently. Because I believe that when you think independently, you'll see this for what it is. One big fat scam, a money grab. You go back to that clip earlier of Inslee saying, hey, I know that my Climate Commitment Act raised rates for you guys, energy rates, but we're going to write checks to you guys to help with energy prices. You did that to us. Now you're going to write us a check with what? Our own money? This man is wild. This is crazy. I'll also note one more thing. There were only, we believe, 3 reporters in the room, which is indicative of the sad state of the media. I mean, an opportunity to ask Governor Jay Inslee face to face about some of these criticisms of his actions around the Climate Commitment Act. Because only 3 asked questions, and then they went back to the first one, and the governor only took 4 questions total. So one of the questions, I believe this is Matt Markovich, sounds like his voice. He asked Governor Jay Inslee about the initiative that is going to the legislature in less than a month that would repeal the carbon pricing program. And he asked Governor Jay Inslee what he would say to people who feel inclined to support that initiative because they're being stuck with these higher prices. Their budgets are really hurting. That is a legitimate question. It is a question and an opportunity for the governor to make a case based on the facts and the merits. Well, watch what the governor does instead of answering the question.
What do you say to the people who really want to back that, believing that you are taxing the people who can least afford it with this, and the oil companies are passing on this tax to the consumer? What argument would you address, in your words, to those people who really want to back that initiative to repeal the CCA?
Well, let me show you. Instead of telling you, let me show you what I would say to those people. Why don't all you kids come on up here? Can you guys come on up here? That's a pretty good question. What would I say to those people who want to allow the oil and gas industry to pollute to their heart's content for as many years as they want and put their toxic gases into the atmosphere of the state of Washington? What would I say to them? What I would say to them is these kids, when they're 72 years of age, like I am, will have a Washington state where there's some trees that haven't burned down, where they can breathe because forest fire smoke has not ruined their lungs, where their mom and dad got a little help financially with their utility bills, where they can get on a school bus that's electric and drive for free. What I would say to them is these kids deserve those things.
Shameful. When posed with a reasonable question about the impact that his climate policies are having today on working class people in this state, instead of answer, Governor Jay Inslee chooses to turn around, gather up a bunch of little kids, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, trot them out in front of him as little political pawns. That's pretty gross. And it's not the first time the governor has done something like that when faced with a difficult question that he simply cannot answer. You remember back in September, we were reporting on the fact that Governor Jay Inslee's right-of-way initiative, the initiative that is spending millions of dollars to remove homeless encampments from state right-of-ways along highways. Remember we reported that we crunched the data that the state had actually put out there, and we found out that it was costing more than $1 million per homeless person to get them out of homelessness? And our friend Jonathan Cho went down to one of these dog and pony shows that the governor was holding, and Jonathan Cho asked him a really important question. How do you justify that cost? And here's what the governor did.
How do you justify that price tag, Governor?
I want to tell you something, that last question. How do I justify the fact that we're making an investment to clean up these encampments? I'll tell you how I justify it. These people are working their fannies off, and they're doing great work, and they got families at home, and every single one of them like to eat, and they like to pay their rent, and we need to pay them, and we don't expect them to do it for free. They're hard-working people.
So transparent. So phony. Rather than answer a question about, hey, why are you spending more than $1 million per person to get them out of homelessness? Which is a legitimate question by any stretch of the imagination. The governor goes out and he gets these people that they're paying probably minimum wage to clean up these encampments, and he tries to manipulate people's emotions into forgetting that their program is a failure, into deflecting a question from the media. The same thing he did this morning by getting a bunch of little kids to stand in front of him, between him and the media, so he could manipulate people's emotions to deflect from a legitimate question about the reality for working class people in this state. And need I remind you, and we've said this before, I think everyone cares about the environment. I think the vast majority of people want to make sure that this planet of ours is going to be host to us for a very long time. We care about the planet that we're leaving behind for our kids. But it is not caring about the planet to push through policies that bring in billions of dollars to the state coffers that then result in no net improvement to the climate goals that you yourself put forward. That's not caring about the environment. That's not caring about the climate. That's fraud. That's failure. And if people really cared about these goals, if Democratic lawmakers really cared about these goals, if those kids at that community center this morning really care about those goals, they would all be looking at Governor Jay Inslee and asking him, why aren't you doing better? Like I said at the beginning, I have seen very few things like that. This is damage control from a governor who knows that more and more members of the public are waking up to what is happening around the Climate Commitment Act and the fact that if we have capable, competent leaders, we should be able to come up with policies that can improve the environment while not making life difficult for working class people.